Has Oberheim just released a new Behringer? And Roland have just released some more Aira. Welcome to this week's rant. So one of the big articles that's come out this week is the fact that Oberheim have released a new synth. And it coincides that Oberheim have released this new synth at the same week that SuperBooth 2022 is in Berlin. And I should have been in Berlin this week, but I wasn't. And I wasn't in Berlin because when I was looking to go to SuperBooth earlier in the year, and there was another reason why I was going to go to Berlin as well, I looked at all the dates and realised that the holidays that had been carried over, if you like, from those that I booked pre-pandemic. So quite a lot of the travel companies, when I booked the holidays pre-pandemic, had said, do you want to still do the holiday or do you want your money back? And of course I wanted to still do the holiday. So I kind of got credit vouchers that had to be used within a certain time frame. So then I rebooked all the holidays and then realised that kind of SuperBooth didn't work, which really annoyed me. And it annoyed me for two reasons. Number one, going to SuperBooth because I wanted to go to SuperBooth. And the second reason it annoyed me was because Kibu, the Nordic synth wizard, was actually playing in Berlin the same week. And I could have knocked two birds off with one stone, if that makes any sense. Because I've been trying to see Kibu for about the last 5 years in concert or live. And a few years back, when he was due to do London, or due to the UK, should I say, he fell ill and the whole of the UK leg of the tour had to be canned. So that was pretty much a pain. But at the end of the day, you know, you have to look after your health. And then the next time I was going to go and see him in Sweden in the September of 2020. And of course the pandemic put pay to that because you couldn't travel. So I sort of thought at the beginning of the year I could knock two birds off with one stone. SuperBooth and Kibu, but I couldn't do that. Now turns out I could have knocked three birds off with one stone because I could have met Tom Oberheim, because he's been in Berlin at SuperBooth 2022 promoting the new Oberheim synth. But that's enough of SuperBooth 2022. Let's get back to this synth. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Over the last few weeks, we kind of knew something was coming. In fact, we knew something was coming a long way back than a few weeks ago. Because why would Oberheim and Behringer settle the trademark dispute? Now, if you didn't know what was going on, basically Tom had the right to use Oberheim in the continental US, and Behringer pretty much had the rights to use Oberheim for the rest of the world. And it kind of came in with the strategy of the release of the OB-X8, which we knew was kind of coming. And then, of course, all of a sudden last year, it was all settled out. Cool. Tom got the rights to use all the trade patterns were all passed to Tom, and he could use the brand Oberheim throughout the world. And Behringer seemingly gave up their claim on the name. Now, you know, the smart money knew that there was something else going on here, because, you know, registering trademarks throughout different entities in the world is not a cheap thing to do. So for them to give it up, the money was on the fact that effectively what they'd done was they had allowed, or Oberheim was not going to challenge the release of the OB-X8 synthesizer that Behringer was developing. That's kind of where we thought things were going. Anyway, over the last couple of weeks, months, if you like, more teasers have been thrown up on social media. You know, something new was coming. So we knew something was coming. didn't quite know what. Of course, now we do know what. The what is a new synthesizer, the OB-X8. Okay, and that has arrived coincidentally with SuperBooth. And you look at these things and you say, okay, which trade show are you gonna launch things? Now, a lot of manufacturers seem to have held back from launching stuff at NAMM, probably because supply chains are so difficult to manage at the moment. I work in the electricity industry at the moment, and even we're having problems sourcing certain components. And with the electricity industry, if you're talking about chips and stuff like that, it's really causing problems throughout the world. And of course, a lot of the chips that will be in the synthesizer will be common chips, common op amps, common amplifiers, whatever it happens to be. And there's going to be, at the moment, a finite supply of these things. So, what is the OB-X8? What do we know about this synthesizer? Well, there has been some stuff on social media, there's some stuff on YouTube, but there's not an awful lot of stuff in the market space yet. It really hasn't ramped up into the sort of the influencer environment, much the same as one of the other manufacturers might have done by this point. Behringer are very, very good at teasing us with new product. Only this week we had new pictures of the OB-X8 and of something else. I can't think what it was now. But they sort of came out of the Behringer works that things were carrying on. But we haven't really seen that from Oberheim. He doesn't have the kind of marketing team, I suspect, at the moment that many of these other manufacturers do. It might get there, but it's not there. So I really am just kind of concentrate on the basics, because I don't think I'm qualified to sort of comment on much more than the basics at the moment. But there are some interesting things that you can deduce from the basics. The first thing you notice about this synth is it's got wooden end panels. Why is that important? Well, it's not. But it actually does set the synth off in terms of the colour scheme of the synth and the wood end panels. And I don't know what it is, it just sort of gives it a kind of warmth to the actual plasticky look of a lot of synthesizers nowadays. It's all black plastic, and it's well, let's just leave it at that. And when you get up into the sort of higher end, the manufacturers start to then look at how can they sculpt the synth in a slightly different way. So the first thing you notice is these wood ends. They do quite set the synth off with the colour scheme. The synth itself is a 61 note keyboard with velocity and aftertouch. Now, what's really interesting about that is that a lot of people hitting this kind of market segment, and I'm going to say $1,500, $2,000 area, have been taking aftertouch away, and yet this synth comes with aftertouch. Now, I'm an aftertouch fan. I really do. I like aftertouch, especially when you can program it, so you can make the synth do something a bit bonkers when you just give it a little bit more welly on the keyboard. The keyboard itself is a FATAR keyboard. There's not really much to say about FATAR keyboards. The fact that FATAR seems to be making keyboards for everybody at the moment is kind of neither here nor there. It's a much of a muchness. Not having played it, I can't tell you whether it's any good or not, but it's a FATAR keyboard. The one stat I was quite surprised about in terms of the basic specification is the fact that this keyboard only has 8 voices. And do you know what? Thinking about this, I'm not sure that 8 voices is enough for wide sweeping pads or strings or something like that. I just don't think it's enough, and I'm going to come on to another reason why I don't think it's enough a little bit further on. The keyboard itself is an analog synth. It's probably a digitally generated analog synth, but it's an analog synth. And it uses 2 stem lineage VCOs for sound generation. And the little I've heard of the keyboard being played, I quite like the tonal quality. But it's kind of angling the synth into that area in the early 80s where many synths were being produced with the two oscillators and filter environments that this synth seems to come with. On top of the two VCOs, you've also got a classic stem lineage VCF, and they've stated that's to try and give you recreate the sounds of the OB-X. And also they've put Curtis filters on this thing as well to try and give you sounds of the OB-X8 and I think it's the OB-8, which was Curtis filters as well. Now my notes, I've written the wrong thing down because what I've written in my notes is not true, and that's probably just me sort of when I've typed my notes up. But they're trying to create the sounds of these old Oberheim machines, and we'll come back to that in a minute. One of the commentators, when reading through the sort of marketing material, stated that when they had the exposure to the synth, this synth was all of the classic Oberheim synths rolled into one. Not having had a classic Oberheim synth, I can't really say whether that's true or not. But looking at the marketing material, and we'll come back to this in a minute, it's very possible that that's the market they're going after. When generating patches, they've limited the oscillators to square, sawpulse, triangle and noise waveforms. Is that enough? Don't know. But that's kind of where they've pitched this synth. Now this is where the interesting bit about 8 voices comes back into the mix. Because what they've stated is that playback is either a single tone, a combination of tones in split mode, or a combination of tones in double mode. And when they say combination of tones, actually they're talking about 2 tones. Okay, and if you go and look at this, especially if you're playing this in double mode, which I'm taking double mode to mean layered mode, as in you layer the 2 tones on top of each other, you're effectively splitting your polyphony, so you're only getting 4 notes per layer, per tone in that layered combination. Now that I don't think is enough. If they've started with 16 and you only had 8 in the layered combination and you could only use 2 tones layered, I think that would have been more acceptable. But something here tells me that that is not enough for operating in that sort of mode. Obviously in split mode, you know, the keyboard is playing 2 tones, but it's split somewhere on the keyboard. But when you've got 2 tones layered on top of each other, you have to ask, is that enough? Now the machine itself ships with 400 classic Oberheim voices. And this is really interesting because what they say is they're recreating the classic tones from the OB-X, the OB-SX, the OB-X8 and the OB-8. And that I find very, very interesting. I really do find that very interesting. The question I come up with from this is this a new synth? Or is this a reimagination of the earlier classic Oberheim synths? I say this because the marketing makes a really big ploy towards those old synths and not so much towards what the OB-X8 gives us. Why do I say that? Well, if you think about the System 8, and I've said this several times, the System 8 is actually a very good synthesizer on its own right. Yes, Roland made big things about the fact that you had a Juno and a Jupiter plugin for it, but actually the System 8 is a good synthesizer. And they made play of that, whereas this seems to be playing towards those old synthesizers and a reimagination. Now, I didn't make a mistake at the beginning of this video when I said, is Oberheim creating a new Behringer? And I have nothing to back up what I'm about to say, apart from purely, if you read between the lines, is there something else going on here? The reason I say that is because, number one, if you look at the aesthetics of the OB-X8 and you look at the aesthetics of the UB-X8, the layout is very, very similar. Now, I don't know enough about the older Oberheim synths to say whether it's a common layout. But the other thing that's really interesting is the fact that you've got these older synth Oberheim synths being recreated on this new synth. And that sounds very much like a reimagineering, which sounds very much like something that Behringer are currently doing. So I'm kind of, I kind of ask in my own mind is this new Oberheim synth really something that's based on the ARM technology that Behringer have developed to be able to reimagine a lot of other manufacturers' product that the other manufacturers are not prepared to revisit? I don't know what the answer to that is, but I feel that it's really interesting to leave you with that thought. So this week, Roland have also announced some new instruments. And I'm going to come on to those in a minute. But the first thing that many people in the last couple of weeks have been contacting me about is the rumours that the Roland MX1 is no longer. And I can confirm that if you go to the Roland.com website and you look for the MX1 product, you will find that it now has that discontinued stamp on the bottom right of the image. So I can confirm that the Roland MX1 is no longer, which is really interesting, because does that mean we're going to get an MX2? I think that's wishful thinking, I have to be honest, because I think if Roland were going to release an MX2, I think they would have done one by now. And I think they would also introduce an MX2 that could cater for all the modern USB equipment that Roland have been throwing into the market. But we may be getting something new come along. And the reason I say that is because these new instruments that have been released by Roland are called 3 new area modules. And those new area modules are called the T8 Beat Machine, the J6 Chord Sequencer, and the E4 Voice Tweaker. Interesting names, of course. And they're all colour-coded quite boldly, so you recognise which one is which, other than the Aira stuff, which was all green. But the first thing you notice about this stuff is it's over here. This is my iPad. Okay, my iPad is that big. These things are smaller than that dimension. They're obviously a bit thicker than the iPad, but they are actually smaller than my iPad. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And one of the things I have about micro machines, it's all well and good being micro machines, but you still got to be able to use them. And especially if these things are aimed at real-time use, because the smaller the buttons and the smaller the space between the buttons, the more chance you've got of hitting the wrong button. And we've all done that in a live situation. Now, I know they're taking the cues from the whole sort of boutique thing, which the boutiques were the micros. And I get that. But I'm really not sure about how usable these things will be in reality. But put that to one side. There is a USP and a redeeming feature for these new machines. They're rechargeable. You don't have to put batteries in them because they're rechargeable. And in actual fact, they state that you will get 4 to 4.5 hours off a single charge on one of these devices. I'm not sure about the whole rechargeable gimmick, but it actually is a move forward from where they put the boutiques, either powering off USB or powering off batteries. Either one, well, the battery option, to be honest, was not really an option if you were trying to work, especially if you were trying to work with it live. Hey ho. But 4 to 4.5 hours, you might just get a gig out of those. And people are saying, well, the average gig is 2 hours. Yeah, it is. But when you add on things like sound checks and run-throughs and practices and all the other stuff that you might do when you hit a gig venue, 4.5 hours is probably just about get you through. So that's the USP. What are these new machines? Well, the first one is the T8. Okay, it doesn't take a genius. It's called the Beat Machine. It doesn't take a genius to see that this is kind of a scaled down version of the TR8, TR8S. And especially when you then go and look at the specifications on it, and it turns around and says, this machine contains drums from the TR range of drum machines. Okay, it is a TR8 in a miniature format. Probably not with as much of a drum spectrum as you might get on a TR8 or a TR8S, but it still is. That's what it is. It's a relaunch of that. However, it's a hybrid because you also get a TB303 in there. Quite how they work together, I'm not sure, but effectively what they combine is the TB3 and the TR8. So those two ARIA modules now are one ARIA module, and they've just been reborn. It also says you get a hybrid 32-step sequencer. Okay, fair enough. That's what you get. The next one is the J6. And the J6 has been chosen like that because it gives you chord sequencing with tones from the Juno 60. Again, with the launch of the Juno X a few weeks back, the Juno 60 on this new module, let's see. Now, what's really interesting here is it says this one comes with a 64 measure sequencer. So why would you put a 32 step sequencer on one and a 64 measure on the other? Not quite sure about that one. Alright, let's carry on. The last one is the E4, and they call that the voice tweaker. And I should have said the T8 is the orange one, the J6 is the blue one, and this one is the red one. Now this actually comes with a 24-second sampling facility on it, and I suspect that's to do with things like reverb and delays and stuff like that. But that's the only feature it seems to really sort of be concentrating on. But what Roland haven't said with this one is whether they've copied this from the VP330, which is kind of where they've pitched a lot of this stuff in terms of vocoding in the past. Okay, I've watched the videos that have been released. I've read the specifications. And honestly, I wouldn't buy one of these. And I find that interesting that I thought, you know, I was kind of bought into the whole Aira and boutique stuff, but I wouldn't buy one of these. Why not? It doesn't give me anything more than I really have in terms of the instruments I already have. If I look at drum machines, I've got a TR8, I've got a TR08, I've got a TR09. If I then went up the Behringer route, I've also got an RD8 and an RD9. I think I'm probably fairly well covered from a drum machine perspective. Why do I need this one? The other side of it is I've also got a TB3, and that kind of does me adequately for that sort of function. I know it's not a 303, but then having said that, I look at the Behringer TD3 and look at that and think, actually, you know what, they've nailed it. And if I was going to buy another device, I probably would buy one of them. They're nice. They're a nice size unit for people with fat fingers. I then look at the J6. I've got a JU06, and I've done videos in the past year where I compared the JU06 to a real Juno 106, and it's close, and I mean really close. I've also got the Juno engine on the System 8, and I've got a Juno engine on my Jupiter X, both of which give me far more functionality and control over the whole Juno sound than I would get off the J6. Then we come to the E4, and again I look at the other machines I've got. I've got a vocoder on the System 8. I've got a VT3 here somewhere in a box, but I never use them, so I wouldn't probably use that apart from real extremes. So the E4 doesn't really give me anything. So why would I buy these? I wouldn't. But you can see where these things are being marketed to. They're uber portable, which means they're marketing at people who want to move around. They're also at a price point where I think it's the bedroom beat makers that will be buying these things and putting the beats together in their bedrooms, rather than serious studio style or live style work with them. I just don't think they're right for those environments. Yes, they are uber portable. Yes, you could take them into clubs and you could start jamming with them. But for me, it doesn't work. So the price tag on these units is about £180. So that's £540 for all 3 units if you were going to buy them. But on this one, sorry, it's a miss for me. Now, in other news, just before I let you all go, you can see the keyboard is behind me here. It's been repaired, I hope. The problem I've got with it is I don't think the actual board that sits underneath this is probably going to last very much longer. And the reason for that is when I took this to pieces, and you'll see that in the videos of the S50 restoration, the chassis itself was very, very rusty. Lots of things have been poured through this keyboard, and unfortunately the problem with that is if you don't take the keyboard to pieces immediately after that's happened, then this stuff effectively remains on the circuit board and starts attacking the tracks. And that, I think, is what's happened to this particular instrument. Is things have been poured through it. It's obvious from the rust. They've damaged the tracks, and when I was examining the tracks, I can see quite a lot of track damage. In fact, I'm quite surprised more of it's not dead, and hopefully I haven't disturbed it as I've tried to repair it. So there's more to come on that, and there's more to come on the 909, which I keep teasing you with. I am in the process of cleaning it. I keep getting distracted, but that's coming along, so watch out for those videos. And on that note, I'm going to say live long and prosper, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye bye.